Hi, I'm Steve Barlow. This is the Humanised Workforce Future You podcast video, where we're talking about perceptions of the future, issues that we need to be aware of, and their role in a rapidly changing work and life environment.
Hi, I'm Craig Saffin. The Humanised Workforce Future You podcast series is focused on the key factors evolving to create a more humanised workforce and how people from all walks of life are creating their future selves.
Welcome to the Humanised Workforce Future You podcast. My name's Steve Barlow and we're joined by Craig Saffin as always. Hello, Craig. How are you today?
Hi, Steve. It's a very exciting podcast today, isn't it?
Yeah, we're off to a new sort of beginning again because this is our second series, following on from last year and our first series of 50 interviews. And in this series, we're going to be doing it a little bit differently. We're going to, rather than focus on individuals and people and what they think and what they bring, we're going to be focusing on topics and discussing topics. And I guess a theme that we're trying to integrate our podcast around is big ideas made simple. So there's a lot of big ideas around, and sometimes they're hard to understand, sometimes they're confusing, and there's lots of voices with different opinions. But what we want to try and do is to simplify these big ideas so that we can get a handle on it and make it applicable in our lives. And we're going to kick off today, Craig, with the big idea, the topic of optimism. So that's probably a good place to start for a new year of podcasting.
Yeah, it's often talked about at the moment, isn't optimism, and the necessity for optimism and how you engender the optimistic outlook, isn't it? So.
Sure. Well, I guess the world is kind of restarting after COVID, and hopefully we're looking at towards better times. I think what we should do is to start with sort of defining optimism and what we think it is and what people have said it is and how we see it. So do you want to kick it off? Do you want to raise some ideas along that line, or do you want me to?
I think for me, optimism is being able to solve problems and to see through difficulties, right? To see a way through. And I think that there's certain people, especially if we're talking about leaders, then people want to follow leaders who can solve problems and not necessarily be so down and in a dire situation. And we're all faced with dire situations. The pandemic's been a dire situation for many people, but in amongst it and risen out of it has been a lot of people who are optimistic and can see a way forward. What about you?
Yeah, look, I think that's a really good definition, seeing through difficulties and solving problems. I think that, a lot of common ideas that are probably misconceptions really about optimism. Some people think that optimism is someone who always hopes for the best, or someone who expects things to work out okay. Or maybe even someone who sort of sees the glass half full rather than half empty. And these are some common ideas around optimism, but they don't necessarily help us to actually define what we should do and how we become more optimistic. You remember last year we had Victor Purton as one of our guests.
Yeah, nobody could forget Victor. He's larger than life, isn't he? So.
We should get Victor back again.
Yeah.
But Victor heads up the Centre for Optimism, and I was looking on their website. They've got a list of definitions of people who've contributed what they think optimism is, and I read through a lot of them. But there was a couple that really stuck out to me. One went like this: true optimism is someone very aware of the setbacks, roadblocks, and less than ideal situations. The caveat is that they see these setbacks as temporary and something that they've got the power to overcome, even if they don't know exactly how or when. So it's part of that problem solving thing that you're talking about seeing through difficulties, seeing setbacks as something that are temporary things. They're not permanent roadblocks. I mean, they can be permanent roadblocks if you allow them to be. But if you see them as something to be overcome, then they're not going to stop you from getting where you want to get to. They're just obstacles along the journey that you've got to overcome. And the second one that stuck out to me was optimism is knowing that no matter what challenges we face, people acting with goodwill and effort can improve upon it. This isn't a dream or a wish. It's simply the story of all human progress. And I guess that brings in the concept of goodwill and effort, that doesn't happen by magic. But with goodwill and effort, we can find ways around. So I think that sort of underscores what you were saying about seeing through difficulties and solving problems. I don't want to dominate the conversation, so
no. Can I come in with a bit of a story? I think everyone's been through dire situations. I think that through my career, I've been in many difficult situations where you need to be able to show leadership and you need to be able to help people see a way forward through a difficult. I think one of the situations, if you don't mind indulging me, I can tell you that I was when the Fukushima earthquake came. In Japan, I was sitting in a coffee shop in Ginza with one of my sales leaders, and all of a sudden, while we're having this coffee, when you have moments like this, then you can remember the details clearly. And we're having a coffee, and all of a sudden, the Ginza buildings and the telegraph poles and everything starts shaking, and there's huge noise and ruckus. And soon after that, there were people out in the street and quite upset. And what I did is I went back to my office, which was just around the corner, and I went up into the office and via the stairs, of course, because the lifts are all out. And my sales director was calmly gathering people together and making plans for the next steps of what people should do. And what I always remember is when we got together and we made the calmness is the first thing. You have to have calm in a dire situation, and then you have to have what's called a bounded optimism. That means you give people some sort of way forward in a way they can face the challenge without being simplistic or talking down to them or trying to trivialize what's going on around. And so we made a plan for all the staff, both all the staff that were on site and all the staff that were not on site. And I always remember that night after it was a long finish to the day, but I always remember all of Tokyo was walking home, right? There was no trains, there was no buses, the roads were jammed with cars and the cell phones weren't working. So you've got to try and imagine a situation like that. And the whole of Tokyo was walking home. And the most amusing thing that I remember in the calmness, people were calm and resolute and stoic and still optimistic. The Japanese are always stoic and optimistic. But the most amusing thing that I saw is that the lights were still working at the intersections. And so even though the cars weren't moving, predominantly the Japanese would stop at the red light and until it turned green. And I thought, okay, so we're still compliant and we're still trying to fit in. So
yeah, I mean, I think optimism has got to be based on the idea that problems are always going to come. They might come in dramatic ways like earthquakes or pandemics, or they just come naturally.
Yes.
Sometimes they come because of what we're doing. And what we're doing creates problems. Yeah. Sometimes they come from the environment outside of us. But whatever, we can learn, we can adapt, we can change, We can find new solutions, trial and error. We make mistakes, but we can be optimistic if we believe we can solve these problems.
Yep.
And we can see through the difficulties, as you said at the beginning. And that's the grounds, I think, for being optimistic. And that's how we can grow as individuals and how we can grow as organisations. Thanks for watching this video on Humanised Workforce Future You. Please leave a rating or review for the series on the medium where you source your videos.
The transcripts for today's video can be found on craigsutton.com. Please subscribe to the series to avoid missing out on future episodes.